Good evening, folks. And tonight we're going to talk about square root, where communism came from. Karl Marx, who wrote the famous book called The Communist Manifesto. He pretty much had a very entertaining book about that. A couple revolutions went on in France that it pretty much came down to that. In 1848, a revolution occurred when Napoleon III took over. And then we saw how a lot of things have occurred since then. But the question is, he wrote a book about how it all entered. He wrote these ideas that just went through his head about how communism should work. And Lenin took after it. And so did a lot of others. Stalin followed the footsteps after Lenin died. And pretty much a lot of other people followed in the footsteps that were communist. Now, if you want to learn about it, look it up. It's called Communist Manifesto. It was written in German, but you can get the English version of it. Just type online, English version of Communist Manifesto. It's interesting. I read the whole book. Quite entertaining. Now, it pretty much kind of talks about how it all works. It pretty much says free education. They're all about free education, pretty much what it's mainly all about. It also states how his thought also came down to the fact of where things... He pretty much was a critic of capitalism. Karl Marx is one of those people who's very critical of capitalism. He pretty much said, I object to how things are done. And so, where do the future dictators take that word from? Well, let's take a look-see here. First, let's start with Lenin. Lenin really didn't hold long in office due to the fact that he died. Vladimir Lenin, that is. And then later on down the road, Joseph Stalin took his place. Stalin held office for quite a long time until 1953, up to his death. And then we look at others like Hitler, who pretty much used his kind of ideology. Then we use Lao, who was the first Chinese communist that ever take office, and pretty much Now, here's how they used it. They used a very authoritarian version of it. In other words, they don't use it to their advantage. Very more of a so-called my way or the highway. Very corrupt type version. That's how pretty much all the communists use it. They could have done it forcefully. And that pretty much did it forcefully, but not without a fight. Some people went easily, others didn't. That's pretty much how the German Civil War started. 1918, in the middle of World War I. But then, in the middle of World War, then after World War I, it kind of went on. Hitler was arrested. Then he kind of got out of jail. So it went on over in Russia, where the Soviet Union came out. Now, who knows if it ever would, the question is, if World War I ever would have happened, would Russia ever been thought of as a communist country? And would any of this communism that we're talking about right now ever come about? World War I pretty much was what caused all this rise of communism. Seems like. Because it seems like that's the only way it ever would have happened. And he pretty much played it all out. It started in one place, which was the Soviet Union. And it worked its way to China, North Korea, Vietnam. It started out just as the Vietnam War. Well, they were called the Viet Minh, and they wanted to get away from the French, and sure enough, it was known as French Indochina at the time. But they ended up getting their freedom from the French, but the country split in two. It was North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Then the Vietnam War broke out so they could reunite the country as one, and sure enough, they were victorious. And it became Vietnam as one. Sure enough, country was now in shambles. Now it's just Vietnam. Now the question is, then you have Laos, then you have Cuba, another foreign country that uses communism. Now, what do all these countries have in common? Russia, then they kind of dropped the communism idea and just went back to their kind of socialism ideology. Now, how does this kind of ring all in one? Very simple. Karl Marx was very, very idealistic when it came to writing books. He wanted to literally, when the first French Revolution broke out in 1848, not the original one where Napoleon the First came into power, but Napoleon the Third. When that one came about, when he first took power, he started writing it, and pretty much, well, once he wrote the book, the Communist Manifesto, I think that's when he wrote the Communist Manifesto, during that time frame, they came out and said, "You're out of here." And he kicked him out. But the German then he died in France. Then he died in England in 1883. But this is a famous quote that he quoted, and I say in quotes. If I can remember right, let me try to remember this right here. And I say in quotes, "History is bound to repeat itself the second time in force, but in a farce." Kind of weird, isn't it? But actually, wait a minute. History is bound to repeat itself the second time in a farce. So what's that tell you? Tells you a lot. I mean, kind of right about that quote. I mean, seems to be the way it's going. But Karl Marx pretty much called it out. Now, what exactly communism is more of a thing of where one side can say where it was one party where property is no longer private property. Private property no longer exists. Meaning everything that's private property is now public property. You have no privacy. In other words, is what he's trying to say. That's pretty much what it all is. Now, with that being said, we're going to talk about a few wars. And then, with that being said, I'll get back with you on a few other things. So, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. I'll get back with you. With that being said, I'm out of here. Peace.